In January 1939, on a field outside Ota, the Imperial Japanese Army's own test pilots climbed out of a brand new fighter and reported that it was worse than the plane it was built to replace, slower to turn, barely faster, carrying a luxury nobody had asked for. 35 months later, on the 22nd of December 1941, that same aircraft caught 12 Australian fighters over Kuala Lumpur and destroyed 5 of them in a single engagement. Nothing about the design had changed except what had been taken out of it. The Army had never even held a competition for the specification. It handed the job to one company and asked for about 7% more speed than the fighter already in service. The impossibility was never speed. It was the clause underneath it. And the man who solved it spent the rest of the war watching other men pay for it. The requirement reached Ota in Gunma Prefecture in December 1937. The Army's air headquarters wanted a successor to the Nakajima Ki-27, 311 miles an hour, 5,000 meters of altitude in 5 minutes, 800 kilometers of range. Modest figures. The Ki-27 was already close to most of them. Then came the clause underneath. The new fighter had to turn at least as well as the old one. The old one was light and had fixed landing gear. The new one would carry retracting gear, a bigger engine and more fuel, and every one of those is weight, and weight is what kills a turn. Somewhere in that building a hand went down a column of figures, crossing out everything that could be crossed out, and arrived at the same answer twice. The Army held no competition, which meant there was nobody else to blame. Nakajima Hikoki wasn't a hopeful outsider. Founded in 1918 by Chikuhei Nakajima, it was the first aircraft manufacturer Japan ever had, and by 1937 the largest. The Ki-27 was theirs. That reputation is precisely why the requirement was handed over without a contest, and it was also the trap, because a firm that wins on reputation can only ever lose on reputation. At Mitsubishi in Nagoya, Jiro Horikoshi was working the identical weight problem for the Navy, 8 years ahead of Itokawa, out of the same aeronautics department at Tokyo Imperial University. Nakajima's own radial engines would end up in the nose of both aircraft. One company's engineering, 2 services, 2 rival fighters. Nakajima couldn't lose the contract. It could only fail to deliver it. They weren't competing for the job, they were competing with physics. Hideo Itokawa was born in Tokyo on the 20th of July, 1912. He graduated in aeronautics from Tokyo Imperial University in 1935, went straight into Nakajima, and worked on the Ki-27, the aircraft whose success was now the argument for skipping a competition entirely. That is the whole reason the job landed where it did. He had helped build the thing they were now trying to beat. It's worth being honest about the records here, because they don't agree. Some accounts name Yasumi Koyama as chief designer, with Itokawa responsible for the aerodynamics. Others put Itokawa at the head of the team outright. Japanese sources tend to credit him specifically with the aerodynamic design. The disagreement has never been fully settled, and it matters, because the question of whose name ends up on a drawing runs through everything that follows. What isn't disputed is his age. He was 25 when the requirement arrived, handed a national fighter program with no rival firm to hide behind and no margin anywhere in the numbers. He had 1 aircraft's worth of reputation. He was about to spend all of it. The prototype was completed on the 12th of December 1938 and first flew in the opening days of January 1939. It failed. Not spectacularly. That would have been easier to deal with. It flew. It met most of the paper requirement, and the Army's test pilots climbed out and reported it was less maneuverable than the Ki-27 and barely quicker, and that the retractable undercarriage was an unnecessary luxury. 2 more prototypes followed in February and March. Nothing improved. The Army moved to suspend the program. In another shed at Ota, Nakajima quietly began work on an improved Ki-27 as a fallback. That hedge wasn't cowardice. Thousands of people drew wages from that plant, and a firm that stakes everything on a single drawing isn't brave, it's negligent. Itokawa bought time with a promise: give him the aeroplane back and he'd redesign it. What followed was subtraction, carried out across nearly 2 years and 10 development airframes, a slimmer fuselage with reduced cross-section, finer tail surfaces moved further aft, a new canopy, a line-by-line weight reduction program, a one-piece wing built on 3 spars because a one-piece wing weighs less than a jointed one, and a joint is one more place to add metal. And then the 2 things that weren't there at all. No armor plate behind the pilot's head and back. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Both of those deserve stating plainly because neither was an oversight. Armor is a bet that a pilot will be hit and ought to survive it. Leaving it out is the opposite bet that a light, fast aircraft in trained hands won't be hit at all, and that the weight is better spent on the turn that keeps him out of the gun sight. Given the engines Japan could actually build in 1939, it was arguably the only bet on the table. He wasn't taking weight out of the aeroplane. He was borrowing it. Against a war he had every reason to expect would be short, then came the addition that saved the design. On the 11th prototype, Nakajima fitted differential butterfly flaps, fouler surfaces that could be dropped in a turn to buy back the lift a lighter airframe would otherwise run out of. Some accounts credit the idea to Hideo Itokawa himself, though that's attributed rather than documented. The 13th prototype brought everything together. The Army's enthusiasm came back with it. Production was ordered in November 1939, and deliveries from Ota began in February 1941. It worked. That was the problem. If this is the kind of history you want more of, a like and a subscribe do more for this channel than you'd think. It runs on research and nothing else. Stay with it. The turn in this story hasn't happened yet, and when it comes, it doesn't come from the enemy. The production Ki-43 managed 308 miles an hour at around 13,000 feet on a Nakajima He-25 radial with 2 machine guns in the cowling. The 59th Sentai received the first of them at Hankow between June and August 1941 and flew the type's first operational sortie over Hengyang on the 29th of October. The 64th followed. Then the aircraft started coming apart. From August 1941, Ki-43s began failing structurally in dives. The 59th lost 4 or 5 outright. Inspection found roughly 20 more, with wing defects that ground crews couldn't correct in the field, and the aircraft went back to Tachikawa for improvised strengthening. One pilot of the 64th, Yohei Hinoki, recalled long afterwards that there was a crack near the undercarriage bay you could get a fingertip into, and that he climbed into it frightened. The first installment came due before the war did. On the 8th of December 1941, the 64th Sentai flew from Fuquoc to cover the landings of the Japanese 25th Army at Kotabaru, Singora, and Patani, escorting bombers over the airfield at Sungai Patani. 2 weeks later, Kato led 18 Hayabusas over Kuala Lumpur and fell on the Brewster Buffaloes of 453 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force. 12 Australian fighters were up. 5 were destroyed and 4 damaged. That wasn't luck, and it wasn't only the pilots. It turned inside what was sent against it. It climbed away from most of it. It arrived where nobody had expected it. For roughly 6 months across Malaya, Burma, the Indies, and New Guinea, nothing the Allies could put in the air reliably beat it in the fight it wanted, and almost nobody knew what it was. Allied pilots came home reporting zeros in places where the Japanese Navy had no aircraft at all. The Oscars victories were being filed under another machine's name in another service's legend. On the Japanese side, the fiction ran the other way. The first published use of the name Hayabusa came on the 8th of March 1942, and it was the idea of a public affairs officer, Major Masaru Nishihara. On the same day the wreckage was counted at Kuala Lumpur, the 64th's ground crews found cracks in 6 more wings. Both sides were now telling a story about this aeroplane. Neither story was accurate. The collapse came in stages, and they're worth naming. The first was tactical. Claire Chenot had already ordered his pilots in China never to turn with a Japanese fighter. Climb above it, dive through, fire, keep diving. RAF units in Burma thought that was nonsense at first. It wasn't. A turning radius is only an advantage when the other man agrees to turn, and by the middle of 1942, fewer of them did. The second was intelligence. In late 1942, Australian troops recovered K-143s at Buna in New Guinea. That November, the Allies opened a technical air intelligence unit in Hangar 7 at Eagle Farm in Brisbane. and by early 1943 they had built one flyable Oscar out of 5 wrecks. They flew it against a Spitfire 5. Below 20,000 feet, they concluded, the Oscar was the better aircraft. The enemy now owned the number. The trade-off had a ceiling, it had been measured, and it was going into training. At Hollandia in April 1944, the same thing happened again, when American mechanics of the 84th Aerodrome Squadron, working under a line chief named William Garza, rebuilt a captured Oscar out of salvage in their own time, painted American stars on it, and had it flying by September. The third was firepower. From late 1942, B-24 Liberators appeared over Burma, and 2 machine guns were never going to bring one down. Yasuhiko Kuroe, Toshio Sakagawa, and Satoshi Anabuki worked out head-on passes in trail, each fighter firing in sequence. Inventive, effective, and a workaround for something the design couldn't fix. The fourth was the fix itself, and it came late. In December 1942, the 64th received the Ki-43-2, 13 millimeters of armor behind the pilot, rubber-coated tanks, a stronger wing, 329 miles an hour. Hinoki remembered it afterwards as a machine you could finally fly with confidence, and remembered in the same breath that the job had changed to intercepting bombers, which it had neither the speed nor the guns to do. The fifth was industrial. Nakajima stopped building Hayabusas in mid-1944 to make the Ki-84, whose engine proved unreliable and couldn't be produced in numbers, so Tachikawa kept turning out Oscars until the end. 36 regiments flew the type at its peak. 18 still had it in August 1945, largely because nothing better arrived in quantity. It wasn't the best fighter of the war. By 1944, it wasn't the best fighter in its own Air Force. The design had been a BET on 2 things, elite pilots and a short war. It got neither. 19-year-olds with 60 hours were being strapped into an aircraft that had only ever rewarded 1,000. The debt was called in, and it was collected from the pilots. In the final months, hundreds of Hayabusas were expended in suicide attacks. A fighter whose entire protection was the ability not to be where the bullets were had become, by doctrine, a machine intended to arrive. Tadao Kato didn't live to see any of it. On the 22nd of May 1942, over the Bay of Bengal, his aircraft was set alight by the gunner of a Bristol Blenheim of 60 Squadron, Royal Air Force, and went into the sea. He was 38, credited with 18 victories, promoted 2 ranks posthumously, and honored at Yasukuni that October. Then Japan did something with him he might have found strange. In March 1944, Toho released Kato Hayabusa Sento Tai, Colonel Kato's Falcon Squadron, directed by Kajiro Yamamoto, with a young Ishiro Honda credited as assistant director. It was a national policy film. It took the officer who had been one of the aircraft's loudest critics, the man whose armorers had to nurse unreliable guns so his pilots would believe in them, and made him the face of the machine. And it did that in the spring of 1944, after Midway, after Guadalcanal, when the dominance it depicted was already 2 years gone. A national policy film isn't a memory, it's an instruction. The company went next. Nakajima Hikoki renamed itself Fuji Sangyo in 1945, and under occupation policy the firm was taken apart, split into 12 successor companies by 1950, though some accounts say 15. Aircraft work was prohibited outright. What those engineers built instead in 1946 was a motor scooter, the Rabbit, designed specifically around whatever Nakajima machinery had survived, with wheel hubs reportedly turned on a jig meant for bomber tailwheels. 5 of the successor companies came back together on the 15th of July 1953 as Fuji Heavy Industries. In 2017, the company renamed itself Subaru. Itokawa lost more than a job. Aeronautical research in Japan was banned, and the discipline he had trained for since childhood simply stopped existing as a legal activity. By one municipal account of his life, he considered killing himself. What he did instead was scatter brainwave recording equipment, instruments for measuring the depth of anesthesia, acoustics, violin making. In a Chicago library in 1953, he found a book about space medicine, and that was that. On the 12th of April 1955, on a field at Kokubunji in western Tokyo, he fired a rocket 23 centimeters long horizontally through a line of paper screens because Japan had no radar capable of tracking a vertical launch. 15 years later, on the 11th of February 1970, a team he had founded put the country's first satellite into orbit. He had already left the institute. He died on the 21st of February, 1999. In 2003, an asteroid was named Itokawa. 2 years later, a Japanese spacecraft touched down on it, and in June 2010, its capsule came back through the atmosphere and landed in the Australian desert. The spacecraft was called Hayabusa, named officially for the falcon's habit of hovering over its prey and snatching it. Not for the fighter, same word. In March 1942, it was a press officer's invention for an aircraft with no armor, and in the end, no way home. 68 years later, it was the name of a machine whose entire purpose was to come back. Ota is still building. The plant that turned out Hayabusas turns out cars now, sold more than anything on how well they hold together around the people inside them. If you've got a view on that trade, whether stripping the armor out in 1939 was the right call, or a mistake somebody else was always going to pay for, put it in the comments, and like and subscribe if you want more of this. The argument didn't end in 1945, and it isn't settled now, because in January 1939, on a field outside Ota, the Imperial Japanese Army's own test pilots climbed out of a brand new fighter and said it was worse than the plane it was built to replace. Everything after that was the cost of proving them wrong.